If you unfollowed every other account in the world, you could still follow Blockworks and get all of your crypto news. Each channel within a company needs a hyper-specific, like qualitative and quantitative goal. So the quantitative goal for a Twitter account is obviously the followers. The qualitative goal is just to make it the one-stop shop for people to follow. If they unfollowed every single other accountant in the industry, they could still follow Blockworks and get all of their news.
Welcome to Entrepreneur's Handbook Podcast, where we share inspiring startup stories with practical takeaways for you, the listener. Today's guest is Jason Yanowitz, the founder and CEO of Blockworks, which is a finance media company that's grown rapidly since its inception in 2018. They have over 50 employees and run an editorial site, a newsletter, multiple podcasts, so they have the biggest podcast network in the cryptocurrency space. And they also host massive live events, such as Permissionless, which had over 7,000 attendees. Jason is a massive expert in the blockchain space, so I'm really excited to share his podcast with you and to share his thoughts on the future of cryptocurrency and how he built his business and the risks he took. Let's go on to the show. Welcome to Entrepreneur's Handbook, Jason. It's a pleasure to have you here.
Thanks for having me. Excited to be on.
You were talking just before this, and you're potentially going to get your co-founder, Michael, on this as well, because we heard how you guys have such a good relationship and you've known each other for years before you even started Blockworks. But I'd love to dive deeper into that backstory of where did Blockworks come from? And was it your first entrepreneurial journey? People listening who don't know anything about you, tell them how you got to where you are today.
I'll try not to bore folks too much so I can keep this short and sweet, but it definitely was not my first entrepreneurial journey. I'm from San Francisco, and ever since I was a little kid, both my parents are entrepreneurs. And I think my first entrepreneurial venture was in third grade. I would buy baseball cards on eBay that had really bad marketing. So I'd find the baseball cards I thought were valuable, but the ones that were marketed really poorly, maybe they had a crappy picture, or maybe the marketing copy was kind of subpar. I would buy them. I would take better pictures and then I'd post them again right on eBay. So I'd get the card and I'd resell it right on eBay that same day. I would just have better marketing copy and a much better picture. So I think I was in third or fourth grade then. And that was my first, I think, venture into entrepreneurship, but also my first venture into realizing just the opportunity that exists on the internet. And so I did a bunch of other things after that, several other kind of small, side hustle type things. Always kind of worked with the side hustle and an entrepreneurial venture through college and high school. But it wasn't until Blockworks that I really went full to. Blockworks is the first real thing that I guess I've actually founded. Mike and I my co-founder go back to university. We've known each other for 10 years. And really the story with Blockworks is one year at college, I studied abroad in Budapest, Hungary, and the Hungarian students out there, this was 2015, got me really, really interested in Bitcoin. Their parents had lived under, a communist regime. They loved this concept of self-sovereign money. They got me into Bitcoin, came to the US, I came to New York, worked at a venture capital firm, worked at a software firm. And in 2017, the market absolutely started ripping. And the crypto market started ripping. And so I kind of flashed back to what those folks in Hungary had told me about Bitcoin and Ethereum and things like that. And Mike and I got together and we said, look, this space eventually is going to become this big institutional asset class. Web3 will eventually take over Web2. And if that happens, the number of investors who come into the industry is going to grow by exponentially, right? By orders of magnitude. And those investors are going to demand a much higher level of information about the industry and a much better and deeper level of information. And so we set out to build that with Blockworks. So we've been on this journey for about 4.5 years now.
And was it easy to get started up? Was it something because you just thought, like you said, it's such a no-brainer, you thought there's so much investment coming there? Or was it actually quite hard to where do you even start? How did you know this is the way you wanted to get into Blockworks or how you wanted to get into the space?
Yeah, our story is, I would say it's a kind of a classic example of doing things that don't scale. And I think maybe some founders start out and they have this big grandiose vision of, the 10-year vision. That was not us. And by the way, I have a feeling that most folks who say that they had, after 10 years of building their company, they say that they had this big grandiose vision. I have a feeling that most people didn't at the beginning. They're kind of just hustling their way into creating something out of nothing because those first days and weeks and months and years of a startup are always the toughest because you're trying to push this 800-pound boulder up a really steep hill. And that's what we did. I mean, we both had day jobs when we started Blockworks. This was in December of 2017. And we would wake up at like 4 or 5 a.m. before our jobs. We started actually just with events. We would, rent out an area and we would say, we're hosting an event from like 6 to 10 p.m. And we would just kind of sling tickets on LinkedIn. Mike and I would both wake up at like 4 or 5 a.m. and we'd jump on LinkedIn and we would max out our LinkedIn connections. And I'd send a message to, I'd say, hey, I'm Ardeep. We have this event coming up in a month. Tickets are $50, but for you, you can get it for $25. Sign up on Eventbrite. And so we literally just started with hosting these small happy hour events in New York. And that was really the backbone of the community that we created. Now we have millions of folks who listen to Blockworks or follow Blockworks or read Blockworks on a daily basis. But it all started with that kind of the event, those first 200 guests at that first event in February of 2018. And just on the easy versus hard note, we really called the top with Blockworks. We started Blockworks. I think we formed the company in December 20th or 25th, which pretty much, if you look at a price chart, that calls the top of Bitcoin. And we kind of rode Blockworks and built Blockworks into just a deep, deep, deep bear market for the first 2 years of existence. So it was quite tough, but it's been really rewarding.
Yeah, I like you said there about how people have the grandiose vision, and sometimes it does feel like it's applied in retrospectively, right? And I do think a lot of people that I've talked to, where often their first business is them just being curious about something, them just thinking I really like this idea, let's see what we can do with it. And sometimes it's the later businesses, once they've got the experience, they've proven themselves in their own eyes, that's when they might do something that they really believe in or they have a bigger vision. But I think it's very difficult for people right at the start to have that vision and execute it. And it's a mistake that I think entrepreneurs often make is they set themselves such massive targets and then that crushes them. They're not able to do it. So when you started off and you're doing these events at the beginning, how did you manage that? Were you setting yourself small targets of let's get this many people to an event, and then from there it built momentum and then you went into other things? Or how far ahead did you look while you were doing that?
I think you bring up a good point, which I would just piggyback on before going into that, which is I think there are a lot of different reasons why people start businesses. And some are the right reasons and some are probably the wrong reasons. And I think there's kind of maybe a correlation with success there. And honestly, the type of market that you're in usually dictates kind of the why behind why you keep going. And I think founders who start businesses to make money usually don't end up maybe making it, because when the going gets tough, the money dries up, right? There were months at Blockworks where Mike and I didn't pay ourselves a single cent. And actually many months in kind of the bear market, and things got really, really tough. Things were really, really tight. And so if you're just starting a business to make money, there are a lot better ways to go make money. Go be a software engineer at Facebook or Google and you'll make $500,000, right? Go be an investment banker, go work in private equity. You can make a boatload of money that way. That's probably an easier way to make money. I think there are different reasons why folks start businesses. And one might be just because they want to break out of the mold and it's in their DNA, which I think is a good reason. That's probably maybe more why I started a business, is because I've just always wanted to kind of do something that was different. I think sometimes people do it for ego, which is honestly not a bad reason. I think when things like down markets come and bear markets happen, sometimes your ego, because you are so tied to your business, I think that actually maybe that's a reason that people keep going, is because they just can't fail, because their business, their whole identity is tied up with their business. And I think that's what you saw with a lot of crypto founders actually in 2018 and 2019, is it's probably easier to actually shut down the business, but your identity and you are the crypto person in your circle, and you've taken this massive swing and this massive bet and you've told everyone about it. And so shutting it down is just failure is not really an option because it's so tied up with your identity. So I don't know. I just thought I think that's an important piece to touch on there.
Yeah. And it's true. I think I've met a lot of founders who they can admit they're more driven by insecurity to prove that they haven't made a mistake than necessarily the success itself. And I think there's quite an interesting interplay there. And during the bear market, did you at any point think are we just making a mistake here? Have we just gone down the wrong path? And was there any points where you were close to quitting? Or did you always have that belief that you were doing the right thing and this was eventually going to come to fruition?
We were never close to quitting. There was never an inkling of an idea that said hey, should we shut this down? Should we quit? We never had that thought. I think everybody in crypto, in the entire industry, had the thought, did we get this wrong? Right. And that's one of the biggest differences. A lot of people today are, we're 6 months into this bear market. A lot of people are saying, how is this bear market different than the last bear market? There's a lot of things that you can point to. There's permanent capital versus ICO capital. There's a lot of differences. There's institutional capital instead of just retail capital. There's a lot more companies. There's a lot more just human capital in the industry. But I think one of the biggest differences is today, nobody who works in the industry is saying, is this going to make it? Like, did we bet our careers and bet our lives on the wrong thing here? Did we jump on the wrong track? The question today is more just, how long is this bear market going to last, and how deep will this go? How bad and what will the intensity of this bear market be? In 2018 and 2019, that was different for most folks, which is the question was, did we get this wrong? Like, is this thing actually real? And is this really gonna make it? Is this industry actually what we thought it was going to be? And so I think that was one of the big differences. But so I think just to summarize that, Mike and I never thought about quitting. We did think if the industry was going to make it, but I mean, we were either going to ride the industry down with it or be successful.
And then what made you go all in? What made you take it full time and quit what you were doing before?
I think there's a fluffy answer there, which is this big, again, that grandiose vision. But I think there's a real answer, which is so let's see. I remember the moment I feel like Blockworks started is when we went to a Staples and bought a whiteboard. And it was a $20 whiteboard, but it had a chip in the bottom right-hand corner. And so we haggled with Staples, and we actually got Staples to give us a discount on the whiteboard, got it down from $20 to a $15 whiteboard. And that was in December of 2017. And we mapped out this big, I think it was like a 1-year vision, like go host 6 events, make a couple $100,000. Here will be the cost, and we can make some money. And so we hosted our first event February of 2018. We both still had day jobs. And then in May 10th of 2018 was New York Blockchain Week. And you had this big flagship tentpole event called Consensus that CoinDesk was hosting. And then there was Blockworks, which was, today we just hosted a 7,000 person event, but back then we were hosting a 120 person event. And it became such a big ordeal to host this thing. And it was so hard to sell tickets to this thing because people were going to other events at New York Blockchain Week that Mike and I just said, we need to quit our jobs to go all in on this. And the original plan was Mike was going to quit his job first. Then I was going to quit my job. And instead of that, we kind of just ripped the Band-Aid and went full time just because of the sheer amount of work that we had. And honestly, we thought that second event wouldn't be successful if we didn't go full time.
I think with the events as well, one thing with the crypto space is just how much the community seems to look after each other and reach out to each other. Do you feel it's always that way in the past as well? Do you think that's something over time that the network has got stronger between people? And you've obviously been a part of that through Blockworks.
I would agree and disagree. So I think it depends on what market you're in. In bull markets, there is a lot of infighting within the community. And, you've got the Avalanche community doesn't like the Solana community, and the Solana community doesn't like the Ethereum community, and the Ethereum community thinks the Bitcoin community is a bunch of maxis. That's not what happens in bear markets, at least in the depth of the bear markets. In the depths of the bear markets, it's like an us versus them mentality. It's like you've got crypto, and then you're kind of up against the banks and Web2 and everyone who's saying this thing isn't real. In the bull market, you look at CNBC and Forbes headlines, and the headlines are crypto is going to the moon, all the $1 billion in funding. I think $32 billion of funding came into the industry alone last year. So the headlines are very hypey. And the narrative is oh my God, crypto might actually be real. And so when that happens, we don't need to fight anyone outside of crypto. The infighting happens within the industry. That changes in a bear market, though.
And how have you dealt with that infighting? Because obviously you deal with people from all different technologies and from different groups as well. And on your own podcast, you're interviewing people from different backgrounds and very different opinions. Have you ever had to kind of pull back on some of your own opinions a bit to just give other people that platform?
We have. That's one of the core theses, actually, of some of Blockworks' channels and products is actually not being as opinionated there when it comes to what is the best thing to layer one to build on, for example, or something like that. So let's actually use some real world examples and figure out how this played out. So if you look at a lot of the big podcasts, for example, you have maybe What Bitcoin Did with Peter McCormick. That's a Bitcoin show. You have Bankless, which is an Ethereum show. A lot of the big shows actually started around these kind of like asset classes and ecosystems. Same with conferences, right? If you look at a lot of the big conferences, you have like ETH Denver, which is obviously an Ethereum conference. You have like Solana did their event in Lisbon, Avalanche did it in Barcelona. You have Bitcoin Miami, which is very like hardcore Bitcoin event. So let's use conferences as maybe a good example. We went to Bitcoin Miami in 2021 and had two big takeaways. A, what an incredible event. This was amazing. We got to meet all of our internet friends in real life and come together, and the parties were great and the information was great. On the other hand, we were really kind of frustrated by the conference because there's so much happening in the industry. There's DeFi, there's NFTs, there's gaming, there's all this metaverse stuff. The amount of capital coming in is incredible. The amount of people coming in are even more incredible. But here was this Bitcoin event that was so focused on just one single aspect of the industry. And so what came out of that conference was our team sitting down and saying, there's no one big event that brings this entire industry together where the DeFi community can meet the NFT community and everyone on Twitter, all these crypto Twitter degens can come together and be friends in person. And so that's what we set out to build with Permissionless. And so it took us about a year to build it. We just hosted it a couple of weeks ago. And yeah, had several thousand people who came out and over 1,000 companies represented. And yeah, it was just a really incredible event.
Yeah, like I've seen some of the pictures from the event and the videos as well. And it's just incredible to think where you started off only a few years ago. And then now you've built such a huge audience, being able to get people in person as well, because people flew from all over the country for that, even I guess other parts of the world too. And one thing I'd like to give you an opportunity as well is that you said that people often are in their own different tribes and they don't hear about some of the best things about the blockchain technologies coming out. What are some of the things that you think are really exciting right now that maybe people don't hear enough about that you think could be a really big deal in a few years' time?
I think we're in the period of the kind of quote unquote bear market or the crypto winter or however you want to talk about it, where we're still reflecting on the last bull market to say like what happened in the bull market? What were the kind of wins and what were the losses as an industry, right? And like what needs to get built? And so when you think about some of the things, when you look at some of the things, for me, the opportunities and the exciting things just come out of the problems, right? Because when you have problems in an industry, that's an opportunity for amazing entrepreneurs. Every problem is a business, and every business will be started by several entrepreneurs, or every opportunity will be kind of looked at by several entrepreneurs, and those entrepreneurs will go at it, and they'll all raise money, and the best one will win. And that's why building companies is so amazing, is because it's a series of people who are solving one problem after the next. And so I think some of the problems or just opportunities that I'm looking at going into this bear market and maybe looking forward a couple of years are just the DeFi ecosystem, I think is incredible. That was one of the biggest wins to come out of the last bull market. It kicked off in summer of 2020 with Compound and Uniswap did their airdrop, and that really kicked off DeFi summer. I think a lot of the attention got taken in the last bull market by things like metaverse and gaming and NFTs, which is all super, super exciting. But I think DeFi is, to me, one of the most exciting aspects of the industry for one simple reason, which is I don't know how many people listen to this podcast. Let's say there's 10,000 people listening to this right now, or let's do an easier number, 100 people listening to this. I bet if you ask 100 people, do you enjoy your relationship with your bank? You're going to probably get 95 people who say no. If you say, do you enjoy your experience as a business accepting and sending wires? 95% of people are going to say no. Do you enjoy your experience with money in general and like how you use money? It's no. Like it is a broken system that is built on technology rails that date back to the early 1970s. And I think what we're doing with DeFi is really fundamentally changing that. And so I think there's so many exciting things. And I think what you're starting to see is some of these, in the same way that the internet is just a bunch of protocols that plug into each other, like SMTP and HTTP and security protocols. They're like these information protocols that plug together to create what we know of as the internet. You're starting to see the same thing happen with basically financial protocols. And if you think of the internet as just a bunch of information Legos put together, we're now building financial Legos that stack together. So you can really quickly see a world where, let's say I'm running a DeFi protocol and I've got revenue. I can take out a crypto native loan by issuing a collateralized bond against maybe my revenue against the fees that my decentralized exchange are spitting off, right? All this is doing is just removing trust and removing middlemen, which is really, really exciting and is like the backbone of the original goal of what we all set out to do here.
I think one of the things we both share as well, that we talk about the crypto information problem in terms of how there's so many great things going on, but then for a lot of people in the kind of mainstream media or the average person on the street, it still sounds quite intimidating. And it's when we talk about different things about how these protocols work, sometimes it's harder for people to imagine how that affects them in their daily lives. And I know you're trying to like impact this at Blockworks as well. And what are the areas that you think that could really take off like to a wider audience sooner? So we've seen like NFTs have done, well, they had a bull market in the recent times, and you had your own Hermes as well, which did very well. Which areas do you think maybe will really get a lot of people to dip their toes into the blockchain and to understand what's happening, and then like kind of the gateway to the more complicated side?
I think this is one of the common pushbacks actually of the industry is like folks maybe outside say like, I'm not touching any of this stuff. I don't, it's too complicated. I'm never going to use Ethereum. And I would completely agree with them on that. Like I have a feeling that you will never touch a layer one. Like you will never touch an Avalanche or an Ethereum or something like that. In the same way that let's use an example. I think what ends up happening is if you think back to maybe the 1990s or the early 2000s when kind of credit cards and like money over the internet was starting to get created, and people were just getting. If you ask most people, again, if you had this podcast in the year 1995 and you surveyed 100 people and you said, do you feel comfortable putting your credit card in, or your debit card, whatever you had in online, or definitely your bank account information, 95% of people would have said no, right? What ends up happening with technologies that are beneficial is there's usually, the majority of people are pretty skeptical, right? And then what happens is the technology pushes out into kind of more B2C and B2B services as the backbone of those services. And eventually, just like what happened with credit cards, no matter how much you hate the technology or how scared you are to put your credit card into a machine, eventually you just kind of succumbed to this new technology because it was a better system, right? And so I think that's what ends up happening with crypto is a lot of the stuff that gets built on like Ethereum. So a lot of the things that get built on Ethereum or Avalanche or Solana or any of these layer twos, I don't think you ever actually touch the core layer. Like nobody touches SMTP or HTTP. What I actually think happens is even some of these DeFi protocols that get built on, let's say, Ethereum, I don't actually think you're touching them. I think there's like almost this there's this layer that exists on top of them that people can access. And I think the majority of folks will access some of these protocols through the applications that live on top of them that are maybe much more user-friendly and easily accessible. But the cool thing about this is if you ever want to interact with the protocol directly, you can still have that option.
I think one of the points here as well is about how, for most people, something being on the blockchain isn't necessarily a selling point unless somebody's an early adopter or they're into that tech side of things. What they care about is it solving my problem. And when the apps are being produced on like the different layer twos are solving people's problems, and like you said with the money aspect of where banks, a lot of people have problems working with banks. If the blockchain or like an app on the blockchain is solving that, people don't necessarily care about what's underneath the covers. They care about this is making my life easier. And as more of those applications come out, I think that's potentially how people are going to start interacting with it, like you said, because they're not even going to know what's underneath. They don't care if it's Ethereum or Solana or whatever it is underneath, as long as it's doing what they need it to do.
That's exactly right. I mean, that's how I think a lot of this plays out.
With Blockworks, you've had Permissionless recently. How was that event? Because you've obviously done so many events now. Did it go smoothly? Was there any like problems you had in the organization? Would you do anything differently next year?
No, I mean it was the first like large multi-thousand person conference that we've ever hosted, which the logistics that go into those, I think anyone who's hosted a conference will appreciate it and understand. But those who maybe have just attended, they don't realize how many logistics and things go into the back end. What would we do differently? I wouldn't do too much differently. I think next year we're just going to try to go bigger and better. We had this interesting experiment where we, instead of having VIP tickets, we launched a series of NFTs, right? And so we had 555 NFTs, these things called Permies, which was really interesting because the VIP tickets kind of floated in the open market. And so anyone could determine the price of these VIP tickets. And so for us, we might have priced these things at like $3,000 for a VIP ticket, $4,000, whatever it might be. The open market, folks were spending like $25,000. It was like 7 Ethereum at one point to purchase a Permi and to attend in person. And you got access, if you were a Permi holder, to like private VIP events. You got access to go hang out with Des Bryant in the NFL player in our NFT gallery that OpenSea sponsored. And so it was a really, really exciting opportunity.
Yeah. And talking about NFTs there as well, so your one had utility, right? So people bought your NFT and there's something they could do with it. Is that where you see the general market going towards for NFTs now? Because there was a surge of different projects which were potentially just the image itself. But I'm seeing more and more of different projects now that have like real utility. By owning this NFT, you're going to get this. And for people who own the permissionless NFT now, is that something which they have ongoing rewards as well?
I mean, so I think there's two ways to answer that question. One is the Permi specifically. Yeah, if you own a Permi, we actually have a token gated channel within our Discord. So there's this huge Permi community that hangs out and they talk about deals and they talk about the market. And it's really, really interesting being in there. Some of the smartest people in the industry, honestly, are in that Discord. And it's really fun to see it grow. And there's all these, if you own a Permi, you have a lifetime pass to the Permissionless conference. And there's all these amazing things that happen. But I think just in terms of your broader question about NFTs in general, I think what we started with is art, right? And what you saw with a lot of these NFTs is NFTs that don't have utility, right? And I think just a better way to put that is just art that is digitally verifiable and lives on the blockchain and that you can kind of transfer to any platform that you want. And I think that was a really exciting way to kick things off in the NFT market. But yeah, I think where these go is like, it's almost NFTs become a token for communities. And if you look at I think it's kind of dependent on like who is issuing the NFT, right? I think you'll see companies issue NFTs like someone like a Budweiser did. I think you'll see individuals like creators and artists issue them, kind of like Kevin Kelly, I think it was, the 1,000 True Fans model, right? Monetization through Spotify and is completely broken. So things like that. And I think individuals and like artists will we'll issue them as a better way to monetize and like break through some of the institutions so that you don't have to go to something like Sotheby's. You don't have to put your music on Spotify. But yeah, a lot of it is just evolving right now.
The fact that people are willing to spend so much on the Permi NFTs is obviously a testament to people wanting to be a part of your community. And what do you think you did over the years that really made people want to be part of your community? How do you think you built up that level of engagement and level of people wanting to be part of what you're doing?
I think there's a kind of new media model where people don't follow companies, they follow people. And so we've tried to build, I think it's twofold. One is people don't follow companies, they follow people. And if you are a company looking to build a community, there needs to be authenticity. So if you look at a lot of maybe our quote unquote competitors, there's no authenticity, there's no personalities to some of them. And in an age where like there's just, I don't know, a lot of people wear their heart on their sleeve and they don't like to just follow these like cookie cutter accounts, and they don't like to read things that are just like, I don't know, just very cookie cutter. And so I think one thing that we do well at Blockworks is like having a personality and being authentic. And yeah, almost like if you're talking to an individual, it's like we wear our heart on the sleeve. And I think we do that well as a company as well, which has allowed us to build this like very, very, very loyal, but also maybe that's the wrong word. It's just like a very authentic community of folks who rely on us, and millions of people like now rely on us and trust us for their information, their news, their podcasts, their newsletters, webinars, conferences. And now with the launch of Blockworks Research, hopefully they'll rely on us for their deeper insights and research and eventually data as well.
Can you talk us through like the different paths? You started with events, but obviously Blockworks is so much more than just events now. What were the different decisions you made at different times, and why did you choose that as the next growing stage?
Yeah, Blockworks is basically just so a lot of media companies, we basically built a media company ass backwards, right? A lot of media companies start with the content. So for some folks, it's like opinionated content. Someone like a Barstool Sports, maybe it's very like opinionated content. It might be a podcast or a newsletter. For others, it might be maybe news and editorial and journalism. For us, we kind of built, and then they monetize with these like events or with sponsorship driven products. We built it, like I said, kind of ass backwards, which is we built the products before we actually had some of the content. So we built conferences, we built communities through our events and our conferences. After that, we built podcasts, right? We now run the largest podcast network in crypto. We have about a dozen shows. So we started to build podcasts. So then we had conferences and podcasts, but there was really nothing tying it together. So then we built the newsletter. And then we're like, okay, so we have these like 3 products that are kind of floating. We've got conferences, podcasts, and a newsletter. And then COVID happens, our events go away. So we build webinars, right? And so again, now we've got kind of these things that are floating. And then in January of 2021, we launched our editorial site. We brought on an editor-in-chief from the Wall Street Journal. We've hired several folks from the like the Bloombergs of the world and the Wall Street Journals and other crypto publications as well. And we have really a world-class editorial team who I think is the best in the industry. And that site really tied everything together. And so you can go to blockworks.co and you'll see now, it drives into things like the newsletter and into the podcast and into webinars. And now, we feel like we're in a really good place. We've been building this large media business for the last 4 years. And we've got, again, like millions of people who rely on us for their news and information and analysis. And now we're pushing further down the funnel, which are things like research and data that we're super excited to roll out.
It is really interesting that you've done it, because you would expect almost the website and the news side of things to come earlier on in the journey. But for you, it was the last thing after you'd done everything else. Do you think you'd change that around if you could go back? Or like if you were trying to build something else from scratch, would you have started the same way you did? Would you go for events and then podcast, newsletter, then website again? Or would you change that path?
I think I would change. I would probably launch, if I was building a media company from scratch today, I'd probably launch with a newsletter. I'd launch with a newsletter and a podcast because they're just hyper scalable businesses that are digital first. And so inherently probably the margins are better there, and they're just, they're more scalable. I'd probably layer on conferences and edit, and then I'd probably layer on conferences. And then if you want to get into the news business as well, layer on editorial as well, of course. But I think if I was doing it again, I'd probably start with a newsletter.
You've got a significant social media following yourself as well. How was that built up? Was that something which is a strategy, or was it something that just kind of happened because of the other things you were doing? That
was a very conscious decision. So that actually, I can mark a point in time when that flipped. So I've had a Twitter since I guess 2013, but I've never had a following or never really posted or anything like that. I was kind of just lurking. And actually our first podcast that we launched in August of 2018 was with this guy, Anthony Pompliano, with Pomp. Back then it was called the Off the Chain Podcast. Now it's called the Pomp Podcast. And that was our first ever show. And Pomp, I mean, he honestly taught us a lot. But one of the things that he taught us is like having a large social following is one of the greatest leverage, just things that you can do to build leverage in today's like social first world. And so he kind of taught us the tricks of the trade. And I remember Mike and I both had maybe 100 followers at the time, or maybe even less. It was probably like 50 followers. And we said, we're going to race. We're going to have a competition to 2,000 followers. And Pomp was there, like we would go into Pomp's office every single day, like helping him record the podcast and things like that. He probably had about, 90 or 100,000 followers. And so he had kind of done this before. And he was also head of growth at Snapchat, and he was at Facebook on the growth team. So he really knew these algorithms, and he just taught us how to do this. And I think Mike actually beat me to 2,000 followers. But then just like anything else, you just have to, just be really persistent with it and just continue iterating and see what works. And so, it's taken a while, but now I think it's like 70 or 75,000 followers, which is like a total trip. I don't know why 70,000 people follow me, but that's where we're at now. So it all started with actually Pomp sitting us down and saying, you guys should really take this seriously.
What's interesting as well is that I think Blockworks has over 200,000, maybe 300,000 followers, which is interesting because, like I said, like usually the personal brand, people associate that first. So I think it's really impressive that you've been able to build a business brand on Twitter as well. Because often you find people don't necessarily want to follow something without a face. Was that any strategy you had behind that as well? Was it similar to what you were doing on your own personal accounts? Or was there two very different strategies?
Two very different strategies. So when we think about, I think each channel of a business needs a very specific goal. And so the goal for our Twitter is to be like the one-stop shop that someone, if you unfollowed every other account in the world, you could still follow Blockworks and get all of your crypto news. And so we do that, right? And this was a very conscious decision. So if you look at a lot of other media companies in crypto, they'll only promote their own content. So if you go to someone like maybe CoinDesk or The Block or Decrypt or even outside of crypto, it's like Bloomberg or New York Times, like you're never seeing them post anyone else's content, right? Because they don't want to promote the competition's content. But for Blockworks, I mean, I was looking at our account yesterday and I got this notification that Citadel, Virtu, Charles Schwab, and Fidelity are building a crypto platform together. And that was a Bloomberg platform. So we linked out to the Bloomberg story. And so I think each platform, each channel within a company, specifically with digital media companies, needs a hyper-specific like qualitative and quantitative goal. So the quantitative goal for a Twitter account is obviously the followers. The qualitative goal is just to make it the one-stop shop for people to follow. If they unfollowed every single other account in the industry, they could still follow Blockworks and get all of their news.
And what's your goals now for Blockworks more generally? So you've obviously built up the Twitter like massively. You've held huge events. You've got the really strong editorial team. What's next? What are the things you're looking forward to, what you're trying to build?
Yeah, good question. So again, I think you have to, so as a whole, as a company, we still have the thesis that we had years ago, which is that crypto will become one of the largest asset classes in the world. As that happens, the number of investors who come into the industry will grow by orders of magnitude and will grow exponentially. And those investors are going to demand a much deeper source of information. And for us, we think about information in a lot of different ways. You've got news kind of at the top of the funnel and social and things like that, but it drives down into research and data. And so for us, we're focused on really building two parts of the business. You've got the media side of the business, and then you've got the research and data side of the business. And so the media side of the business is just going parabolic right now. It's scaling like crazy, and we have kind of sub goals within that. For podcasts, we want to continue building the largest podcast network in the industry. We'll look to launch a couple more like niche, almost specific shows. We think one thing that happened in the last bull market in crypto is that these kind of sectors evolved. It used to say, I work in crypto, right? And now you say, oh, I work in NFTs. Oh, I work in DeFi. I work in crypto gaming. And so we think there's content to be built across those different sectors within crypto. So you'll see us launch various podcasts within those sectors. And you'll also see us launch on the newsletter side of things, almost like someone like an Axios or a Morning Brew has done. You'll see us launch vertical specific newsletters as well. So maybe a crypto trading newsletter, a crypto gaming newsletter, a DeFi newsletter. And so we're super excited about that across the newsletter and podcast business. On editorial, we just doubled the size of the team. And so we're super excited. We have one of the largest editorial teams with very biased, but I think the best team of reporters in crypto. So just continue bringing better news and information. And then on the events, we're just continuing to scale out the events. We have an event in New York later this year, Digital Asset Summit. We have Digital Asset Summit in London, in your neck of the woods, in later this year in the fall. And then we have Permissionless again next year. So that's the media business. Where I'm spending a lot of my time is the research business. So we just launched Blockworks Research. And that is what we're trying to do there is like build. I don't know if you've ever had this experience in crypto, but if you want to go research something, you end up having like 50 tabs open. You've got your Discord, you've got Twitter, you've got CoinGecko, you've got like a million different pages related. You've got like 10 different data providers, a million different pages related to that one project. We want to bring all of that into one place: governance, tokenomics, data, and that's what we're building with Blockworks Research. We've got an amazing research team right now, and so I'm really focused on just scaling that out.
You mentioned as well about how much you're building the team in particular, and it's incredible for something that was just two of you at the beginning. Who was the first person you took on, and how did you go through that journey? Have you been picking the right people? Because it seems like you're really happy with the people you've got in terms of the editorial team. Did you headhunt them, or how did that come about?
There's an interesting thing that happens in crypto, which is there's two things you can look for. You can look for people who have done the job before and for people who like have that specific skill, or you can look for people who have a really deep understanding of crypto and are really, really deep into crypto. It's incredibly rare to find both. So oftentimes Blockworks and pretty much every company in the industry is making a trade-off. They're hiring, let's say we're hiring a marketer, right? We might be you're kind of hiring a marketer who's like a brilliant marketer, world-class marketer. They've like done a bunch of like growth stuff and they're brilliant and they know the data side of things really well and they're creative, but they don't know crypto. And the bet there is that you have a good enough training program at Blockworks and a good enough team that you can build their knowledge really quickly. Or you go hire someone who's really good at crypto, maybe like is a decent marketer, and you say that, okay, my marketing team is good enough to slot this person in and build them into a good marketer. So, I mean, that's the decision that we're always facing with potential hires. We're now up to 55 folks. We have several open roles still. Like a head of podcasts, a head of HR and people, a head of finance, a head of data engineers, data analysts, a bunch of engineers. And I think that's the decision that we're always faced with, is whether or not to hire someone who has a deep, deep, deep background in the skill or deep, deep, deep background in crypto. And we're at the point in the company where I think any startup and most people you talk to have probably gone through this. At the beginning of a company, you need generalists, people who just roll their sleeves up and get shit done across anything. You need someone who can do sales, marketing, customer support, and go write the copy on the website. As companies scale, you need people who have more and more specific skill sets. So I think of it almost like an Ocean's 11. It's like you can either go hire like a bunch of generalists, or you can go hire like they had the person who knew how to blow shit up and the person who knew how to break into things. And that's kind of the stage of Blockworks where we're going, is we need the person who can blow shit up and the person who can break into things, and our version of Ocean's 11 at Blockworks. And so that's what we're doing right now.
I hope people who are listening now have been paying attention to what jobs you said were open there. So hopefully you get a few people who are applying for those. I remember you can
DM me on Twitter. I would love to chat with anyone listening to this podcast. If you're listening at this point, I feel sorry for you for having to listen to me for 40 minutes now, just ranting about nothingness. But hopefully you've enjoyed it. And yeah, we've got a bunch of open roles. So I'm always open to chat.
If you're going to hire them, they've got to get used to this, right? So
I try not to talk too much at Blockworks. So
the strong silent leader.
I try. People would probably disagree with me, say I talk too much, but that's okay.
Have you found that as well? Because obviously at the beginning, it was just two of you. Then now you're managing such a big team. Do you have a preference in terms, do you like it when it's a small, scrappy team? And then now this is harder for you? What stage do you prefer?
I'm loving Blockworks right now. Like I wake up happy every day and like just love what I'm doing right now. We ask everyone at Blockworks one question in job interviews. Well, we ask them many questions, but what I think is the most important question is, what is your dream job? Right? Okay, I know we're talking about this head of podcast role, but Amardeep, what is your dream job? If you could get paid to do anything in the world and you'd say, oh my God, I can't believe this company is paying me to do this, what would you do? And we end up usually, more often than not, if the person's really good, slotting the person into that role instead of the role that we were originally talking to them about. And there's usually some overlap there. And so now what we've tried to do is we have 55 folks at Blockworks. We've tried to have everyone doing what they love to do, right? And if someone doesn't love doing it, including myself and including Mike, like we try to move things around to make sure that people are actually doing what they love to do and just have open communication around that. And so, that's just the mentality that we take.
Do you prefer the small early stages to where you are now? But it seems like you've enjoyed the journey and where you are now, the management side of things, you've adapted to the management side and having to like deal with different people and because sometimes people find it difficult to manage because they want to do the scrappy stuff.
I'm loving it right now. We have a company where the culture is still very scrappy. And I think that's because you basically have these different teams where we've hired people who are so much smarter than Mike and I. And we have an executive team, we have a COO and a chief strategy officer and a CTO and an editor in chief. And like all four people on the exec team are so much smarter and better than Mike and me at so many different things. And I think they would say the same about their team, right? So maybe our chief strategy officer who oversees like growth might say people on the marketing team are much better than her at marketing. And like, that's the kind of culture that we try to create, is like, go hire someone who knows how to do something specific better than you could ever imagine doing that. And it's very fun, honestly, because you wake up and it's Wednesday morning today. And I just got a message from someone on our research team. And it's like, they put together this thing I never could have even imagined that they would have put together. And it's just, I don't know, it makes me quite happy seeing it come together.
Was that hard at all for you when you first started hiring people to let go of that? Or was it something you just couldn't wait for people to start taking over the different roles you didn't want to necessarily do?
Very hard. I think if any founder says removing themselves from things within a business is easy, they're probably lying to you. I mean, I got a coach basically to help me do it, to help me scale back my time, to help me just leverage my time better, because I was still so in the weeds of things. And like, it's very hard to say no, especially as a founder where like I feel like I have a decent sense of like how to go sell a sponsorship or how to go sell a research product or how to go do marketing. But if I'm doing all of that, the business goes nowhere. And so again, that's why it's so important to hire people that you can do things better than you, but also just people that you trust. And I just really trust people at Blockworks. But it was incredibly hard. It still is hard. It's still a journey. And I wouldn't say I'm even great at it. People at Blockworks would probably say I'm still too in the weeds, but yeah, trying every day to remove myself.
Is there anything else that skills-wise you wish you potentially got better at earlier on? So maybe delegation, you took longer than you should have. Was there anything else in those early days where you wish maybe you'd done things differently?
I think for first-time founders, the hardest thing is usually having hard conversations earlier, more often, and just being more candid with feedback. When you lean into really hard problems, you're going to come across really hard challenges, and you might find yourself in a place where you've put the wrong people in the right people in the wrong places, or sometimes even the wrong people in the wrong places. And there's some really hard challenges and honestly, just hard conversations that come to that. I think now we're really good about being very candid with feedback and just making snappy decisions when it comes to that kind of stuff. In the beginning, we were incredibly bad. We were very slow with feedback. Sometimes we'd sit someone down in a one-on-one. You wouldn't share your honest thoughts. And that's just something honestly, not just founders, but any manager or leader has to learn, is just how to have really candid feedback and know that if it's a hard conversation, ultimately you're helping the person in the long run.
Yeah, I know somebody who, it comes to mind at the moment, who has had an intern for the last 6 months where they're not happy with what they're doing, but they don't have the heart to tell them that they want to fire them. So the person just still there messing things up, and they want to fire them, but they just can't do it.
So that person is doing the intern a disservice, right? Because the intern's going to go work at a job and they're going to keep doing what they were doing, and they're going to be useless still, because it sounds like they're useless in their current role, or maybe useless is too strong of a word. But if your friend maybe gave them really candid feedback and said, hey, you're doing this, this, and this well, this, and this is really frustrating, right? And you could do a better job and it would be more valuable. That is going to set them up better, not just for the next year or for their company, but for their life. And that's how people get better. I think that's one thing that might be missing from like some startups, is that actually exists at more of the institutions, at the Goldmans and at the Bridgewaters and the McKinseys and the BCGs. They have an incredibly tight system for feedback. And there's no fluffy feedback given at McKinsey. There's no fluffy feedback that's given at Bridgewater. And so for all the crap that we might give to some of the large like institutional firms, they've created systems of feedback and honestly systems of just improvement for people. So that's something that we try to look at and improve upon.
What's something that you want to improve yourself in the next few years in terms of running such a large business? What are the skills that you think you need to work on, essentially?
I think there's a tangible way to answer that, and then like a more intangible. I think on the tangible side of things, like we just launched this. For the last 4 years, we've been building a media company, and we still are building the media company. But we just launched our biggest thing yet, which is research. And eventually we might get into, I don't want to share too much, but just the data side of things, right? That's a recurring revenue stream. It's a new style of business. You're selling, it's $2,500 a seat. So like an individual, like you might spend $2,500 a seat, or someone like Visa might come along and spend 100 seats. And that's $250,000 recurring SaaS deal, right? And so that's a very different type of business. And then even data, right? Data, do you like create an indices business? Do you sell APIs? Like, are you selling APIs on a self-service model, or is it like, are you selling APIs for $100K a year to a hedge fund? So that's like on a very tangible level. That's what I'm trying to get better at and learn, is just how to operate that type of business. On an intangible thing, I think Mike and I are both just trying to zoom out and think bigger picture always. Like, it's so easy to get in the weeds of things, but we're trying to, just zoom out and think longer term. And also just maybe, I think everyone at Blockworks is trying to, as the market has calmed down a little bit, just try to slow things down a little bit, take time to breathe. We told the company, if you're debating whether or not to take that 6 p.m. or 5 p.m. walk on a Thursday afternoon, or just send that last email, go take that walk, because there's a lot of burnout in crypto, and that's the last thing that we want.
It's been really great to talk to you today. Where can people hear more about you and also about Blockworks?
I'm on Twitter at Jason Yanowitz, and my DMs are open. So would love to, if you listen to this and you're not dreadfully bored at this point, A, I'm impressed, but B, would love to chat on Twitter DMs. And then Blockworks is blockworks.co. blockworks.co, and then Blockworks Research is blockworksresearch.com. And then I also host a podcast called Empire. So if you're a podcast fan, you can search Empire.
It's a pleasure to have you.
This has been great, man. Thanks for having me on.